guys hear me? Is this on? Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Julia Biggins, and I am running for Congress not just to unseat Barbara Comstock, but also to fight for science. My background is infectious disease, and for as long as I can remember, I've been really interested and good at solving complex problems and helping other people. So I think that led naturally to me obtaining a PhD in molecular virology and studying both HIV and then the Ebola virus for the U.S. Army. And so I'm here to also run for Congress to bring that diverse voice that we did such a good job here in Virginia last year, and I think we need to see that at the federal level as well. And I'm so glad to be out here today. You know, I've spent the last, I don't know how many months, crisscrossing all over the district and listening to the voters, and so I'm really excited to answer the questions here. I'm from the other side of the district in Prince William County, so I appreciate being out here. So much of the attention is focused on Northern Virginia, so you know I understand how important it is to represent the entire district. So I look forward to answering the questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Allison Friedman, and I am not just running for Congress. I am running to get Congresswoman Barbara Comstock out of Congress. In my time working at nonprofits and then as a senior official in the State Department, I've stood up to abuses of power. I've taken on big problems, and I've found big solutions that actually help people when it had been written off as intractable. And while the issues ranged, the recipe was the same. I listened, I learned, and I led. And I think that's what Congresswoman Comstock doesn't do. I'm happy to be here today because I know the western part of the district, not only having often been forgotten by Congress, but I think disregarded by Democrats in particular. And I've spent a lot of my time here immediately after I announced going out to Winchester, but also sitting down with Tia and Wendy and others to look at really what the federal government can do, not only to preserve rollout, but invest in our future going forward, and I look forward to your questions.
Can you hear me? My name is Dan Helmer, and I'm so excited to be here today. Barbara Comstock has beaten every politician in sight, but I'm different. I'm a Rhodes Scholar who served in combat. I am for a Medicare for all option and against drug companies that rip off our seniors. 3 times a year, my wife Karen, a public school teacher, has to drill her classroom in case there's a shooting. And I'm ready to fight the gun lobby so that the weapons of war I carried in Iraq and Afghanistan have no place on our streets. After 9/11, the worst threat to our democracy lived in a cave. Now, he lives in the White House. I'm ready to impeach him on day one. So let's get a candidate who's different, who can win in November. I hope to earn your vote on June 12th. My name is Dan Helmer. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Pelletier. And when I knock on people's doors in VA-10, after they tell me they want to get Comstock out of there, after they tell me they want their health care fixed, they want guns in, guns are taken off our streets, and this president, this executive branch held accountable, they tell me that government is broken and it doesn't work for them. As a federal prosecutor for over 27 years, I actually know how good government works and what good government looks like. For 27 years, I just did what was right and took on and held accountable those who did wrong. I want to continue to do that for you. I want to fight the healthcare companies like I always have to drive down healthcare prices. I want to take guns off the streets like I always have. And I want to hold this president accountable. But I want to do it reasonably and responsibly. But I will tell you this, as Doug Jones showed in Alabama, and Connor Lamb showed in Pennsylvania, people want pragmatic problem solvers in Congress who are former federal prosecutors, and that's what I promise for you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Davis Stover, and I want to start out by thanking you for being here because this is such an important race, not only because it's our home, but it's important to the entire country. There is absolutely no way to take back the House without coming through the streets of Virginia 10. And we have a Congresswoman that has a 97% voting record with Donald Trump, who is bought and paid for by the NRA to a tune of $137,000. And a Congresswoman who always chooses special interests in large corporations over our families and our communities. You know, it's one thing to talk about legislation like the tax bill. It's another thing entirely to have lived it. I was raised by a single mom in a small town, and I know what it's like to charge groceries because you can't afford to pay for them otherwise. I know what it's like to put coins in a mason jar to save up to buy baby formula. And I'm actually running for Congress with over $80,000 worth of student debt. It shouldn't be this hard. I thank you for the opportunity to earn your trust and your confidence and your vote. I do come from a hardworking family, and I will work to ensure that I put our communities and our families first. And I also have over 12 years of federal legislative experience, and look forward to your questions today.
My name is Jennifer Wexton, and I have the roots and record to beat Barbara Comstock in November. I've been living, working, and raising my family in Virginia 10 for almost the last 2 decades. I've served the community as a prosecutor in Loudoun County, as an attorney and advocate for abused and neglected kids, as a member of the Community Services Board, making sure that people have access to mental health care, and even as a judge in our courts. I was twice elected to the state senate from the heart of the 10th district by wide margins. And I went down to Richmond, and despite being in the minority, I've managed to pass over 40 pieces of legislation that help Virginia's families. And I have fought hard for our progressive values, for things like gun violence prevention, for things like making sure that all Virginians are treated equally under the law, for protecting our environment, and expanding Medicaid to the more than 300,000 Virginians who fall in the coverage gap. That's exactly the work ethic and the values I will bring with me to Congress. Thank you.
Alrighty. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage our moderator. At 16 years old, with her organization Rise to Run, she is already making her voice heard, representing her generation, and making a difference. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Pooja George.
So as I've been able to work with Rise Fund over the last couple months here, I've been identified with my age quite a bit, and I love that because we're showing the world what young people can do. But at the same time, I'm really, really happy to be here today with all of you as someone who identifies as a constituent. I can't vote yet; it breaks my heart, but we're doing something about it eventually. So thank you all for having me. So, as Tia so lovely mentioned, we are in Western Vermont. So today we're going to do a little bit of focusing on rural values and talking a little bit more about what we can do for those that live in the area. So, as Tia again mentioned, roughly 2/3 of the land in the 10th Congressional District is rural. The area still has active farms, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and a growing agritourism industry that's helping develop our economy. The area faces enormous pressure to develop, and we are quickly losing our green space. What policies would you support to aid in farmland preservation, and what legislation would you propose to maintain traditional agriculture in the 10th Congressional District? We'll start in alphabetical order. Excuse me, you guys get 2 minutes per question. Lynn, would you mind raising your hand for me? This is Lynn. She will be keeping time. Unfortunately, if you do not listen to her, I will be happy to speak up and make sure that we are staying on pace.
Well, 1 minute and then hard stop.
Okay. So that's green space protection? Okay, great. I absolutely agree. We need to have strong legislation, not only at the state level, but at the federal level too, to make sure that we are preserving the green space and preserving the local farmers that are so important to this community. And And so I think one thing that we can do at the federal level is to designate certain areas out here in VA-10 as agricultural production areas, and to make sure that they are saved for the farmers and for preserving that space. And I also think that we can work with developers to provide or take away tax incentives to make sure that as they develop the land, they are taking into consideration on a smaller scale things like parks, and on a larger scale the Shenandoah Valley and areas like that. And as a candidate, I'm not taking any corporate PAC monies, most definitely not from developers, because I think it's important to remember that we shouldn't develop just because we can, that we need to have that careful planning as we move forward. It's probably inevitable, but we need to make sure that we're thoughtful in doing that. Thank you.
I think three things. I think more than three things, but for 2 minutes, let me say three things. First, I think we do need the federal government to show up as a partner, and it can show up as a partner on conservation easements and providing incentives so that, for example, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors can help preserve not only the rural land that already exists, but also look at the purchase of development rights and help subsidize those so that we can continue to keep rural land rural. I think thirdly, it's important in order to build the coalition that we will need in Washington to have government really hold on to rural Loudoun, to have everybody in Virginia's 10th district fundamentally understand that our infrastructure and traffic issues will only be compounded by development out here that cannot be sustained by our roads and commutes. I think those are really the fundamental three things the federal government can do to address green space conservation.
It's a great question and so important. It's something I hear regularly again and again, and the many times that our campaign is spent west of the mountain. But the issues that we worry about out here west of the mountain are, we share some of the many same of the issues like healthcare and making sure our country is safe and protected by a guy like Donald Trump, but also making sure we keep what is so beautiful and special about western, not just western mountain, but everywhere west of the mountain, so all of Frederick and Clark counties. One of the reasons that our campaign launched literally from Winchester and worked east, because we want to say it's so important that we take into consideration what's happening here. Because this is where I bring my kids when I want to show them what it's like to be out among the farms and the pastures and to see a different way of life than the congested traffic that we face in Fairfax County and eastern Loudoun County. So it's incredibly important that we preserve what makes it great. I think there are a few things that we can do to do it. I agree with the idea that we need to designate rural farmland as rural farmland and preserve that. I think also what we do in the east of the district does matter. And so it's incredibly important that we create incentives for specifically, one, funding Metro. So we need a steady source of Metro funding from the government that makes sure that people know that there's mass transit access in the east of the district so they can get more quickly to work if they continue to build and develop there. Two, we need to incentivize high-density housing along Metro corridors, because if we have high-density affordable housing along Metro corridors, we won't have as much housing out here in the west of the district. And three, I think it's incredibly important that we make sure we take away some of the incentives and tax credits that exist today, both at the state and the federal level, that encourage development in areas that should continue to preserve a rural character. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was a good question. First of all, I grew up in farm country in Massachusetts. And right down the street from me was Bristol County Agricultural School. And in that school, we taught kids, and they taught kids, the value of farming and agribusiness. And I think that we need to spend more time, give more incentives to students to get agricultural education, both in high school and beyond. So I think we ought to incentivize that and reward that, and spend a lot more time on the federal level incentivizing agricultural business and our kids' education. Not necessarily college for everyone, but agricultural college and trade schools. I think that will help, number one. And number two, I think we need to incentivize farming as well. I think we need to give tax credits and continue to promote farming and agricultural business, because we need to keep that business thriving, and that in and of itself will keep residential residential development to some extent. So I would do that, and then the third thing, I agree with Julia that I think we need to preserve farmland from the federal perspective so that it can't be encroached upon by residential building. Thank you.
Agriculture is the largest private industry in Virginia, and it's incredibly important to our local economy that we preserve that. And there's several things in which that we could do. One is in the upcoming Farm Bill. We could make sure that we could protect farmland and our green spaces through this Farm Bill. We also could strengthen the partnership between the federal government and the state government and really strengthen the Farm Service Agency, the local FSA offices, so they can be better partners to our community. And finally, I would say we need to invest in education, make sure that our schools stay strong, make sure that we have the transportation needed for the growth, but also ensure that we protect our farmland and the places that are so beautiful around this district and a rural community. And two, like Julia, wanted to mention, I think it's so important that we keep developers and corporations out of the politics. I too am not taking any corporate PAC money, and I'm not taking any Dominion money to ensure that we can not be beholden to developers and corporations, but only be beholden to the people in this district.
The rural character of much of Loudoun, Clark, and Frederick counties is what makes it wonderful. Loudoun's wineries and farms have become one of our top tourist attractions and one of the things that draws people from around the region to this area. That's why I have supported things like the Freedom to Farm Act in the General Assembly to give landowners the opportunity to open their property up to agritourism and not face burdensome zoning or excessive regulation in doing that. We need to incentivize at the federal level various things that are going to preserve open space and in agriculture. So conservation easements, definitely, to preserve any tax breaks that we have for those. Also encouraging putting property into land use and using it for farm and agricultural use. And encouraging things like buying local and farm-to-table sorts of agriculture and keeping those things local. We also need to incentivize development around transit hubs and where we already have access to mass transit. When we're making infrastructure decisions at the federal level, we need to make sure that when we're looking at rural places like Loudoun and Clark and Frederick, that we look at starting our infrastructure by, for example, enhancing access to rural broadband, not extending water and sewer to those areas, because that will bring in a lot of development that will not be helpful.
So again, this next question is from TWWL and Tia as well. Approximately 1 in 10 people in the 10th Congressional District are federal employees. Under this administration, they've had their funding cut, been targeted, had their integrity questioned, and in one high-profile case, fired for having ties to the Democratic Party. What actions will you take to protect the livelihood of those who choose to serve their country over more lucrative careers in the public sector?
I'd love to go first.
We'll spread the benefit. So I worked in the federal government. I worked at the State Department, but I also helped chair a coordinating body that oversaw activity across all of our agencies, or a significant number of our agencies. And one of the reasons I'm in this race is watching this president appoint heads of agency after heads of agency that not only doesn't honor, but is actively hostile to the missions of each agency. Hostile to facts, experience, expertise, science. So it's incredibly important, I think, to stand up for whistleblower protections and civil service protections. But more than that, Congress actually needs to do its job. And engage its oversight functions so that when Scott Pruitt or Zinke or Tillerson, not only uses those offices to enrich themselves, but uses those offices to diminish the power, honor, and integrity of the people who serve, I will stand up. I've been there when the government was working, not working perfectly, but working better. And I absolutely want to honor federal civil service, and that will be a key part of what I bring to this job.
This is one that's also deeply personal to me. Not only in the private sector that I have an incredible opportunity to work with the second largest federal agency, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and see how hardworking their employees are and how much they were under attack by this Congress. But today, as a Lieutenant Colonel in the Army Reserves, my pay is often managed by Department of Army civilians, so it's a personal one there. And the notion that Republicans have just started attacking the federal government it's not what's happened. It's been ongoing since Reagan and certainly in force since 2012. And oftentimes they don't understand the implications, not just on families and workers of things like government shutdowns or shutdowns, but also on things like our national security. I've witnessed firsthand, I supervise Department of the Army civilians as an officer in the Army, and witnessed critical national security actions that were directly impacted by government shutdowns with bureaucratic mistakes meant that essential personnel, people who were supposed to be essential to our national security, actually couldn't show up to work and get paid, and missions were canceled. So this is real things, and we need real people in Congress who understand the immediate, real-world implications of the attacks on our federal workforce. We're going to stand strong, as I will, to protect our federal unions and labor protections, as well as to make sure that we always pass a budget on time and appropriations bills on time. One of the things I would like to pass is a law that says that if Congress doesn't do its basic job, pass a budget, pass appropriations bills, and there's no recess after September 30th. And more importantly, let's hit them where it matters, no fundraising. We can't fundraise, they will pass a budget, and we'll protect our federal workers. And finally, let's get in place much more robust whistleblower protections to make sure that what's happened in this administration can never happen again, and you can never be persecuted because of your partisan allegiance. I think that's incredibly important. Thank you.
Let me be clear. Federal employees are not only the backbone of our government, they are the backbone of our democracy. It is federal employees right now that are keeping some of these agencies that allow us to live and practice what we do safely, honorably, securely. They're at their wits' end. And they are struggling each and every day to preserve our democracy. I was a federal employee for 30 years, and I did the same thing. But the reason why I always felt like I could give my all is because I believed the people above me, yes, even the political people, had my back. I have a lot of friends who are still in public service, and they don't believe that anymore. So my promise to them, my promise to you, is when I get in Congress, I will make sure that we have their back. Because that's the only way that democracy is going to work. And I've seen it, and I've been there, and I've done it. Now I'll tell you this, Barbara Comstock voted to reinstate the Holdman Act. The Holdman Act was a 1865 anachronism where they actually allow you to avoid civil service rules and fire federal employees. Now this is Barbara Comstock, who's in the district, who's the congresswoman in the district, which is the highest density of federal employees. And she voted to reinstate the Holdman Act, which allows them to fire us without going around the civil service rules. I will never, ever do that. I promise you that. Thank you.
I'm actually a former federal employee. I was the chief of staff on Capitol Hill for many years, working for important pieces of legislation for working families, for students, and for veterans. And then I was the senior advisor in the Obama administration, working on veterans policy. The federal workforce is some of the most dedicated people in our country. And thank God, quite honestly, for them right now under this administration, because they are actually what's keeping our government running while we have a reckless president. The president actually has proposed some significant cuts to benefits for federal employees in the 2019 budget. He has proposed a pay freeze for federal employees. He has also proposed that the government limit their contributions to retirement and health plans for federal employees. And he has also proposed to eliminate the COLA, the cost of living increase for federal employees. All of this to reduce the deficit. Well, this is a deficit that he brought on. He added $1.5 trillion to the national debt when the Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump passed this latest tax bill. And now he wants to make cuts to federal employee benefits. He also wants to make cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and food stamps to pay for a bill that only benefits large corporations.
One of the first actions of this Congress and Donald Trump was to reinstate the Holman Rule, which would allow any member of Congress unilaterally to reduce the salary of any federal employee to $1. That is the tone that they set for how they were going to be dealing with federal employees throughout this administration. And make no mistake, that's by design. They are systematically dismantling the federal workforce and damaging the credibility of this workforce. So, in the government, we are absolutely dependent on our federal employees. We need to make sure that we have a professional, nonpartisan staff of federal employees who have the knowledge, who have the institutional knowledge, and the history to continue to run their agencies no matter which way the political winds are blowing. Under this administration, there have been efforts to undermine everything that these people are doing. Cut their benefits, cut their employment protections. And we can't let that happen. I will have their back every step of the way.
So this, as we've all talked about, this government has destroyed the knowledge base. There we go, sorry. So as we've all said, this administration in particular has destroyed the knowledge base of our country. We have so many civil servants leaving the State Department, leaving the EPA, leaving every agency. And that puts us in a very precarious position, both domestically and internationally. And so I think what we need in Congress is a Congress that is brave enough to stand up and keep the government open and running, to be able to work together, work across the aisles, which is something I pledge to do. As a scientist, we can't do science in a vacuum. We are constantly collaborating with people within our own institutions across the country and across the world. And so I understand how important it is to work together to solve a complex issue like the budget. My own husband is a federal employee, so every time that we hear about the government shutting down, there's that concern. Are we working? Are we going to get paid? And we can't have that upheaval every time Congress can't reach a budget. And where I used to work at USAMRID, we would face the same thing. And there, we were doing critical research on vaccines and therapies that support the U.S. military. So that is a matter of national security to have such an agency shut down and not be able to perform its services. And I think we also need a Congress that is brave enough to stand up when the people being appointed to these agencies, such as Scott Pruitt, have no business being there. And that we need the Senate to not confirm people that are not only not qualified, but have, in the case of Scott Pruitt, have an active agenda against the very agency that they are set to head up.
Thank you, Candace. So those were our two questions from TWWL and Tia. Now I'd like to move on to the first one put up. So as an increasing number of families continue to move to Northern Virginia, to take advantage of our educational opportunities, what will you do to combat the college debt crisis and make attendance to higher education more accessible?
Thank you, that's a great question. I'm so excited too, just to say, one of the most amazing things that happened between 2016 and 2017 was the massive number of young people that showed up in the election. And that's a trend we need to keep going. We need to make sure we're appealing to young people, talking about the issues they care about, and putting candidates who will demonstrate new leadership and a change in perspective from what's going before. It is absolutely critical that we offer higher education broadly in our country. If we look at the 2008 financial crisis, one of the things that stands out is that the increase in unemployment that happened after that crisis was in fact almost directly proportional to the amount of post-high school education that you had. So making sure that we invest in education and offer opportunities to young people to go to four-year college as well as community college as well as get technical education is absolutely critical. There's a couple of things we need to do. One, I think right off the bat we can make some changes to our tax code that incentivize employers to be allowed to treat repayment of college debt not as compensation, which is how it's treated today, but as an expense. Because we know that allowing students to more quickly pay off college debt allows them to more quickly own a home and save a lot more for retirement. So I think that's a quick fix. It's something in the tax code. It's something we can do more quickly. But broader, I think one of the greatest national security threats our country faces today is the divisiveness of our politics and the lack of common experience and common background we have. We have segregated ourselves by class, by color, by religion in so many places, and we don't have ways in which we can talk to each other and build bridges. So I support a national civil service program in which for every year of national service you do, whether it's military service, whether it's working in our schools, whether it's other types of service in the State Department or elsewhere that you do, you can receive 2 years of higher education for free in return. I think if we do that, we will transform the education environment in this country, we will invest in our future and our children's future, and we will also change some of the dividedness that keeps us apart as a nation and allow people to think putting a guy like Donald Trump in office was a good idea. Thank you.
People are getting out of college now with crushing debt. So I think there's a couple of things that we can do to help that situation. The first is we can actually limit the amount of interest that people pay on their student debt. When I graduated from college, I remember my guaranteed student loan was guaranteed at 1 or 2% interest. And I think the federal government has a role in dropping down that amount of student debt. Second thing I think that the federal government can and should do, and that is forgive debt for public service. I believe that we should absolutely, positively make sure that our kids, when they get out of school, if they decide to go into public service, they'll get their college debt forgiven. The next thing we should do is, we have a lot of colleges that are teaching kids for jobs that don't exist. I think we've got to make sure that our colleges, who are burdening these kids with a tremendous amount of debt, are actually teaching these kids skills that they're going to be able to use in a real active job market. So that when they get out of school, they're actually prepared for a job that they're going to go to. And the fourth thing that I would do is I would spend a lot more time incentivizing and encouraging kids to go to trade and technical school, where they can not only not have the debt from college, but they can actually make a heck of a lot more money doing those trades and technical jobs that are right now unfilled in a lot of areas. So I believe there's a whole bunch of sort of things we can do in terms of promoting trade and technical education for kids, so that not everyone has to go to school and burden themselves with all that debt. Thank you.
Education is one of my top priorities. I was raised by a public school teacher, and in our house, I was taught that education provides opportunity, and I wholeheartedly believe that. I said a little bit earlier that I have over $80,000 worth of student debt. It shouldn't be that hard to send our kids to college these days. The Trump administration has actually proposed cuts. In fact, a 10% cut to the Department of Education, just right off the top. Proposed a 50% cut to the work-study program. Has proposed cuts to Stafford loans and to Pell Grants. And I can tell you, when I was a student trying to cobble the funds together to go to college, for me it was a combination of the maximum amount of student loans, working 3 minimum wage jobs, work-study program, and I got a $1,000 check from my granddad. And if one of those pieces would have been missing for me, I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I've had. We have to make sure that education at K through 12 and college education is a top priority in this country. We also have to fully fund community college programs and apprenticeship programs so that we can best prepare our workforce. We need to ensure that people aren't well into their 40s and sometimes in their 50s paying off student loans. We need to ensure that education is one of the top priorities in this country. And if elected to Congress, I will make sure that that's the case.
College affordability is one of the top issues that I hear about from my constituents when I'm out knocking doors and talking to people in the community. So there are some things that we can do at the local, federal, state level that can help deal with those issues. First thing, make sure that these AP credits that our kids are getting in high school actually give them credit for college. Encourage the use of dual enrollment programs and things like that so that when kids do go to college, they've already got their general ed and credits under their belt. Make college more affordable while they're there. Encourage and enhance the use of things like Stafford loans, federally subsidized loans. Betsy DeVos wants to dismantle our public education system and hand it over to private for-profit colleges. Congress needs to fight back against any efforts to do that. Finally, I do think that loan forgiveness for public service is a very good plan and something that could be very helpful. So all of these things need to work together, and they are what I will support in Congress. Thank you.
Education is also something that's very important to me. I have 4 children. 3 of them are in school in the Prince William County School District. The 4th one really wants to get on the bus every morning, but he's only 2. So these 3 have a long road ahead of us in terms of looking at college, but it's something that my husband and I are already worried about. What is college going to look like for us, a working class family? And so I agree that we definitely need to make college more affordable across the board. I too am in favor of civil service as a payback for free community college, and I think in this area in particular it could be so vital because we see in rural America our youth leaving the area to go to college and not coming back, and at the same time not having the professional services such as lawyers and doctors and quality teachers that we so need out here. And so I think in rural America, a civil service requirement would be key so that those children could come back and provide the community with the services that it needs. And I also believe that in addition to college, which we know not every student is set to go to college, and so vocational education is just as important. And those types of jobs are the very fabric of our community as well. And so I think making vocational schools quality and affordable at the same time will go a long way to helping the college affordability.
Look, I think one of the special things about Virginia's 10th district is we have a front row seat to both the opportunity and the threat of the new economy. And I think particularly in Western Loudoun, Frederick, and Clark, we feel that acutely right now. I truly believe there will always be a place for people. The question is whether or not our people will be ready for it. And our failures to invest in education in meaningful ways put us behind. So here are 4 things that I would support. First, we absolutely have to stand up to Trump's budget cuts on all of the proven programs that we know makes college more affordable. Secondly, we need to look at our priorities as stated in the tax bill. So long as interest on capital is deductible, but investments in people aren't, we're valuing things above people and putting our economy behind. Third, some of the smartest, most effective civil servants I worked with were people who found their path there because of the loan forgiveness program. We need to be able to continue that. And finally, in moving forward in this economy, we need to understand that a one-off college experience is likely not going to be good enough for the future. And we need to provide tax incentives to companies and other employers so that retraining and retraining again is available and accessible not only to the people who have.
So
This question actually has to pertain to a novel personal story. So I came home from school and I opened the mail because I never do that. I thought it would be nice. And I found a letter from Barbara Comstock, and it was inviting me to her Women's Leadership Institute. For those of you that don't know, I'm the Virginia Pilot Hub Coordinator for an organization called Rise to Run. We train young women to run for office. We train young women to be prepared to be public servants one day. So, if elected to Congress, what will you all do to ensure that the legacy of women is protected in Northern Virginia and the entirety of the 10th Congressional District? And what will you do in terms of her Women's Leadership Institute? Do you plan to continue it, or do you have a different plan?
I better get this one. I better get this one right. I have 7 sisters. So, look, I was a federal employee, as you know by now, for over 30 years, and I was a supervisor. And I always, and a lawyer, and all of the people that I worked with, all of the units I supervised, had men and women in them. And I always thought it was vital, absolutely vital, to have as a co-supervisor with me or a deputy supervisor with me, a woman lawyer. Because, for a number of things. One, because they were good. And 2, because it set an example for everyone underneath us that, number 1, women in the law were vital to doing our job as prosecutors. And 2, they were just the same as men, and they needed to be promoted equally. And when I got into the Department of Justice, I think in every department I went into, there was about 2 women for every 10 men. So I thought it was important to promote them, and I did. Now, what you didn't talk about was Barbara Comstock is also a leader in the National Women's Forum, which is also, if any of you know it, it's a women's forum that started many, many years ago that I believe denigrates women and women's rights. And I believe that Barbara Comstock continuously talks about through both sides of her mouth. And I think it's important for both men and women to tell the truth and lead out of one side of their mouth. And I believe you can't lead on women's issues on one side and take away women's issues on the other. So I believe, I think if you believe in women's issues and you want to support them, then you have to do it by your actions, and I'll continue to do so. I've done it for 30 years. Thank you.
I agree on the actions piece. We all know that Barbara Comstock has routinely voted against equal pay for equal work, of all things. But I think we've got to firmly support women at all ages. I actually started a program called Power Set a few years ago. And when we noticed the gender gap in STEM-related fields, I went to one of the largest universities that graduates many engineering students. And I asked the top officials, why are you not graduating more women? And what are you doing to ensure that young women are recruited into STEM fields? And after getting a blank stare, I realized we had to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And so we created a program that is in high schools in the Houston area that really promotes STEM-related education. And it provides a mentorship program so that young girls that are interested in STEM-related fields know what those careers look like. But I firmly believe that we have to support women at all ages. I'm also a proud graduate of the Emerge Virginia program, which is a program that prepares, yes, young women and all women to run for office. And I think it's incredibly important that we continue to support those programs that ensures women are at every level of our process. I'm also proud to have a woman running our campaign because at a time when we have so much at stake as women, we have to be able to fight back at every single level.
Barbara Comstock talks a good game about women's empowerment, but she has voted against us on every important issue. She's voted against us on women's health. She's voted against us on equal pay. She's voted against us on access to different kinds of careers. Now, one of the things, when I went down to Richmond to decide, whether I wanted to run for state senate or not, there were a lot of women there. There were very few women. There was almost nobody who looked like me. There was nobody with young children. And I knew that that was not representative of the Virginia that I knew. So when I got down there, I started passing legislation that mattered to women and families. One of the first bills that I passed made it clear that women in Virginia have a right to breastfeed their babies in public places. But I wrote a law that gives women who are the victims of revenge porn a right to sue the violators in court and get damages. I have fought for things like equal pay for equal work and for paid medical and sick leave. These are things that impact women disproportionately, the lack of paid sick leave. I have always mentored young women in their careers and in the law. I've done it through my career, my legal career. I've done it through my career and when I've been in government. And I have many, many women working for me in my campaign. I will always look for the new generation of women leaders and help mentor them along, both now and in Congress.
I just want to say a quick thanks to Senator Wexton for all the work that she has done in Richmond. It is so important to have leaders both at the state level and at the federal level pushing women up and making sure that we get what we need. The bottom line of why I'm running for Congress is this very question. Women are 50% of the population in America, but we are not 50% of our representation in Congress, and that needs to change, and it needs to change immediately. And I think it's important to be boosting women and young girls up at every level. When I was in graduate school, I participated in a program that went into the inner city of Houston, Texas, to provide 6th grade girls an opportunity to learn hands-on science. And I continue to do that wherever I can. I am also a product of the Emerge training program. I think that was a phenomenal experience to bring women together and empower us to take that next step and run, not because someone asked us to, but just because we believe that we can. And I attended the Women's March in 2017, and that was one of the most empowering, awesome experiences of my life. And I take that forward with me every day to know that we are together in this and that we can make a change.
When Donald Trump was elected president, I called my dad in tears in a fetal position the next morning and said, how do I raise my daughter in a country where sexual assault is not disqualifying for the highest office in the land? I'm proud to have been endorsed by Dolores Huerta and Gloria Steinem and the Feminist Majority Foundation in this race, but I'm prouder still of the work I've done to advance women's rights at home and abroad, whether it was sex trafficking or forced labor or the right to privacy in a doctor's office. Here's what I will bring to Congress. First, my rhetoric and my programs will match my votes, and that's a place where I would differ with Congresswoman Comstock. Second, I will not only honor, the fact that it's harder for women and there are a number of barriers for women to be successful in politics, but also the reality that for women of color, it's even harder, and that we need to continue to acknowledge that, and that's something that the women's rights movement has not done.
Thank you. Thank you.
And third, I will advance policies and tax incentives and programs that give women a fair shot at the capital they've historically been left out of, at the employment opportunities they've historically been left out of, and in the school settings that they've historically been left out of. And I'm proud to have, I believe, had the first student roundtable of everybody on this stage, and will continue having them to use my access to advance other people's access.
Sometimes when you have the disadvantage of going last in these forums, it's easy to forget what the question was. But it was important. You asked, would you sustain the program that Barbara Comstock invited you to? And Having Barbara's Comstock run a women's leadership initiative is a little bit like having Scott Pruitt as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. So the answer is absolutely, but we probably need to change the branding a little bit. One of the reasons Karen and I decided that we were going to make this run for Congress is we recognized that Donald Trump's election and this Republican Congress represent the biggest threat to all the gains women have made in 2 generations, the single biggest threat, and we need to fight back. And I am so encouraged by all the amazing women running here and across the country. I have a great relationship with fellow vote vets, endorsed candidates like Chrissy Houlihan in Pennsylvania, who are right now on the ground making change. The single biggest thing we can do to advance the cause of women in this country is to elect Democrats in November. So we need a candidate who's going to beat Barbara Comstock, and I offer that after we've lost 5 times in a row with the same sorts of candidates, we have an opportunity to follow in the path that Conor Lamb blazed in Pennsylvania, in a district that Trump won by 20 points, and put a vet forward running on a record service, beat her here, and get a Democratic Congress. And that's so important to me. My wife, after our second child, was told never to have a kid again because she developed a heart issue. And I'll be damned if the choice about whether my wife gets to live or whether my kids get a mother is in the hands of the government. I plan to be a fierce advocate for choice and for women's rights when I'm in Congress. Thank you.
So we're going to go to audience questions. Thank you all so much, my constituents, for posing these lovely, lovely questions. We're going to shift back to talking about rural Virginia. So what will you do to protect and support our small farms, which provide local identity and produce inclusive prosperity?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit before, we have a really great opportunity coming up in this farm bill. And I think it's important that we have an advocate in Congress that's fighting for our communities and for our agriculture industry here locally. And so I think we have to be able to provide incentives for local farmers and ranchers to ensure that we can have a thriving agriculture community. We also need to have a strong partnership between the federal government, the local government, and the state government, so that we can sell the local goods here, whether it be in farmers markets or in grocery stores around the district. But it's important that we have an advocate in Congress, and we have an opportunity that is coming up here this cycle to ensure that we can get our interests fully advocated for in the Farm Bill.
As I mentioned in the earlier question, we need to make sure that we protect things like the Freedom to Farm Bill and the Freedom to Farm Act so that people have the opportunity to maintain their family farm. We also need to make sure that at the federal level we are incentivizing small family farms, not big international corporations like ADM and Monsanto in their farming operations. Need to explore modernizing and tweaking some of the regulatory structure so that it is not so burdensome on a lot of our family farmers to bring their goods to market, because they should be under a different set of rules than some of the bigger suppliers who send their materials all around the world. So those are things that I would focus on doing in Congress.
So there are a number of things that I would put forward to Congress in order to help and support our local farmers. The first one would be to protect the local farmers against what we see from the large agribusinesses. And I think we can do that specifically in terms of providing subsidies that help these small farmers with their profitability. And so it helps them maintain EPA standards that are out there, possibly help subsidize USGS soil surveys so that they know what kind of crops are best grown in the areas that they're in. I also think that providing broadband internet access is very important. Internet is no longer just a novelty or a luxury. It is necessary for our everyday lives. And so small farmers, I think, can benefit from that, from being not just physically connected, but digitally connected to the larger economy. And I think also that we need to provide greater rail access, and I mean that in terms of freight rail access. When you look out here at Western Loudoun, out towards Winchester, the rail lines look great. They run up and down. But when we get into the middle area here, there's not much access. And so the cost of transportation of farmers to bring their goods to the rail is very high. And so if we could bring more rail out to the farmers, that would reduce their costs. And finally, I think we need to provide opportunities for more farmers markets, to have the farmers bring their local goods right to the areas where people can buy them, and to also have co-ops so that perhaps several farmers surrounding one town can get together, utilize resources together to provide their produce and their crops to their communities.
I've seen the damage of large agribusinesses on human rights around the world, and I've seen the value of small family businesses right here at home. I think there are a few things that the federal government can do and needs to do better. First, we're going to have to stand up to these ridiculous proposals of tariffs, and that's a direct threat here to farmers, and not just because I really love apples and soybeans and pork, though that is true too. Second, we need to be able to increase the nimbleness of USDA guidelines and understand how to, without sacrificing consumer safety any, scale that guidance so that it is accessible and implementable in a reasonable time frame at the local farm level. And third, I think, as important as the long-standing family farms are here, there is a reality that we need to be cultivating new family farms here too. And the federal government can provide a really useful set of incentives and bridges for aging farmers who no longer want to farm and are watching their land value increase according to developers, and new farmers who couldn't afford farmland at developers' prices but could help preserve our rural heritage.
When Karen and I were stationed here more than 5 years ago, one of the things that we fell in love with was our local farms. And one of the things that we're most excited about is, even in Fairfax County, we have a little bit of rural. And just down the street from me, Whitehall Farm opened up. You can go there, and get our produce. And kids go there, do field trips, and actually learn about our land. And so that's part of what makes all of the 10th District great. It's something we need to fight so hard to preserve. I agree with some of the suggestions here that we need to make sure that the regulatory burden that's negotiated by corporate lobbyists on behalf of big agribusiness doesn't burden our small farmers and apply to them the same way, and that we have representatives who are going to make sure that they are taking into account the impact of regulation and tax incentives in our tax code on not just large businesses, but also on small. And that's why I think it's so important that we have representatives that have pledged that they are not going to take corporate PAC donations. And so I think that's something we should ask of everybody here. So many have taken a pledge that they will not take corporate PAC donations. I do have a question for State Senator Wexton, which is, are you willing to join many of us and take a pledge that you're not going to take corporate PAC doing money ever again? Thank you.
I told you I grew up in a farming community, and at the age of 11, I worked on small farms. I worked, my first job I remember was a chicken farm. I was paid $1 an hour. And it was the hardest work I've ever done. And then I worked on a small family vegetable farm because I got a pay raise to $1.25 an hour that he was giving me. And that was even harder. But what was hardest for me was to watch Mr. Rujo, the farmer, struggle every month to make payroll and to make a living in this small family farm. So what we need to do to keep our small family farms running is to allow them to make money and thrive. And there's only a couple of ways to do that. And one way is to incentivize and give them incentives, both tax incentives and otherwise, so that they can make money in these small farm and these small agribusiness businesses. The other way, and And again, this happened to Mr. Rujo. When he died, his kids didn't do it. They didn't take up that business, and his land got sold away. We have to promote agricultural education for our kids. I told you we did it in my hometown, and it ended up, now it's a thriving high school. But I think we have to promote and incentivize agricultural education for our kids so they'll go into the business that their parents go in, and we need to make it profitable. Thank you.
So another issue that pertains to, I think, young people. Adina, raise your hand for me. Hi everyone, so that's Adina. Adina is an amazing female that I had the opportunity to work with at Rise to Run. And her and I came together and planned a really long help, work for our lives. And this is a question that comes directly from my heart and directly from lots of fear. Please talk about how you would work to get common sense gun legislation passed, given the toxic political climate, and understanding the importance of compromise and not letting the perfect get in the way of the good.
The time has come for America as a nation to say not one more and actually follow through. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need policy and we need change. And when you can't change their minds, change their seats. I have been working for years in Richmond for gun safety legislation, and we have attempted on many occasions to do things like institute universal background checks, close the gun show loophole, ban bump stocks, ban high-capacity magazines, institute red flag laws to allow family members to petition to remove guns from people who are dangerously mental ill and posing a danger to themselves and others, only for those bills to be killed on party line votes. I am proud in this race to be a Moms Demand Gun Sense candidate and to be endorsed by the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. They endorse me because they know that I have been working very hard for these issues down in Richmond, and I will keep doing that. You need to be able and willing to compromise in order to govern. You can see that in the legislation that was passed in Florida in the wake of the Parkland shooting. Do we want to arm teachers? No. But it includes a provision in there that could allow that under certain circumstances. Are you going to let that get in the way of all the other good stuff that that bill does? These are the tough decisions that you have to make when you govern. And I always, in every decision that I make, I'm trying to make sure that I protect the safety of as many people as I possibly can, and especially those who are most vulnerable. And that is what I will do in Congress.
So even my 7th grader understands that what the Second Amendment means and what we need to do here in Congress. I was talking with him in March about the walkouts that the students were doing and just what was going on in the country right now. And he said to me, all on his own, he said, Mom, but if there's a right, there needs to be responsibility. So if a 12-year-old can figure this out, I think that Congress can do the same. I'm a scientist. I am no stranger to working together for complex solutions. And so I pledge to you today that I will work across the aisle to make common sense gun legislation. But also as a scientist, I look at this issue through scientific lens. And a lot of what has been suggested has been what I think are very important and very essential, but also a fix and not a solution. And so I think what we need to do immediately is to repeal the Dickey Amendment so that the CDC can perform the research on guns. This is what the CDC is set to do. It does it in heart disease, it does it in automobile crashes. It is specifically prevented by the Dickey Amendment, which is supported by the NRA from performing this research. And until we have that data in hand, we will not understand why gun violence is a unique problem in the United States. You're 6 times as likely to be affected by gun violence as you are in Canada, 16 times as in Germany, and 29% as in Australia. And so I think that we need to solve this problem here at home. And speaking of Australia, I think we can also do something that they did following a mass shooting in their country, and that is to institute a national gun buyback program. The bottom line is that we need to get the most deadliest weapons off the street as soon as possible.
Congresswoman Comstock sold our kids' safety to the NRA. I am running to get it back. I think your question was about compromise, and here's the approach I would bring there. I think compromise is critically important to the legislative process. But you compromise on preferences, never on principles. And for me, where that difference lies, on principle, I will never negotiate with the NRA. I think the NRA is harmful to America, and it doesn't represent responsible gun owners and non-gun owners alike. And I think that's borne out in a conversation that they have falsely framed as if there are only two options, which is either take everybody's guns away or any gun, anytime, no matter what, no questions asked. And I think there are a whole number of reasonable solutions that we have some data, but not enough, many thanks to the Dickey Amendment, that show will make people safer. And there are real conversations to be had in governing. I am very hopeful that we will work really hard to continue the momentum of the blue wave and be able to have that conversation. But as long as the NRA owns our elected officials, there is no opportunity for reasonable compromise.
Absolutely. Compromise is deeply important, and I am someone who in the business and both in the private sector and the military seen the value of compromise, where it's so important that everyone has a seat at the table, so that we in negotiating legislation of great importance make sure that gun safety advocates have a role in the discussion, that we talk to people who we may not disagree with who are gun rights groups, and that we craft legislation that makes us truly safe. Now, a lot of people have heard me talk about that I deeply disagree and think that State Senator Wexton's decision to vote for the NRA's #1 priority, reciprocal concealed carry, was a mistake. But I think that not because it was a compromise. I think about it because it wasn't a compromise. In fact, 60 gun safety organizations asked our governor to veto it because they hadn't had a seat at the table and they didn't believe it was going to make it safer. It was called a gift to the gun lobby. It wasn't called that by me. It was called that by every town for gun safety. So I think we need legislators who are willing to compromise, and I in fact have pledged to co-sponsor a bipartisan bill every year that I'm in Congress. And I was recruited to run by a bipartisan organization that thinks it's so important that we bring a new generation of leadership who put country before party. It's absolutely critical. But I think on the issues of compromise, we need to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. I also agree with Allison that it's incredibly important that we challenge some of the rhetoric that the NRA is bringing to the thing. So for instance, right now, the NRA is saying there is no gun show loophole. And folks have said, like State Senator Wexton, that we have carried legislation to close the gun show loophole. Yet, 2 weeks ago, I was able to walk into a gun show in Chantilly, 2 miles from the school, and carry out an assault rifle without so much as a background check. You can go on YouTube, take a look at it. And we need folks who understand what legislation has passed and hasn't passed and what really we can do to change the laws. Thank you. Thank you.
This issue fires me up. My outrage over gun violence is not new. For about 30 years, I've been fighting to keep our streets safe from violence and guns. I will continue to do that in Congress. I want to pass, and I've written op-ed articles about this, I want to pass safety legislation that includes taking weapons off of our streets, including assault rifles, including high-capacity magazines, bump stocks, and the 5-day waiting period for a 3-day waiting period for buying guns and closing the gun show loophole. But also I think, and I've advocated, that red flag statutes are very important. In the states that have enacted red flag statutes, domestic violent deaths have been reduced by almost 50%. And most of those deaths that have been prevented are women's deaths. So it is vitally important that we get a national red flag statute enacted. But let me tell you what, and by the way, I'm a hunter, I'm a former cop, I'm a prosecutor, I'm a lawyer. I can convince people that none of what I just said would violate the Second Amendment, and when the NRA says so, they're full of crap. Now, let me just tell you one other thing about the NRA. 80% of Americans, by the way, want what I just mentioned in terms of gun safety. We don't need to talk about compromise. What we need to talk about is showing the NRA for what it is. And I've taken on corrupt lobbyists before. Jack Abramoff is one. And I will take on and take down the NRA because they need to be exposed. They are the single biggest impediment to real gun safety legislation. But let me just tell you one thing before she says stop. They're taking money from Russia, and they are selling the AK-47s to us. And one of the reasons, you think Russians want their people to have guns? No. Why are they giving us money? Why are they promoting the NRA?
I'm sorry, keep this,
simply because they're trying to destabilize us and destroy us as a country.
I'm proud to be a candidate of distinction for Moms Demand Action, and also endorsed by the Pride Fund to end gun violence. Because the idea that this issue is too complicated for Washington to do something about, honestly, is outrageous. Outrageous. And thank God for the students that are serving as the conscience of our country right now. I believe that you're too dangerous to board an airplane. You should be too dangerous to walk into a gun store and buy a gun. I believe that the same weapons our soldiers use on the streets of Baghdad should never be used on the streets of our community. And like 97% of this country, I believe that we have to have universal background checks. I also believe those with a record of domestic violence should never, ever be able to get their hands on a firearm. We are 5% of the world's population, yet we own over 40% of the world's guns. We have a gun epidemic in this country. And if Congress will not change the policy, then we have to change our leaders in Congress. We can never compromise our children's safety, and I will make sure that we work really hard to reduce senseless gun violence in this country, because at the very least, our children deserve to go to school and feel safe.
Voters in Virginia have said again and again and again that healthcare is their #1 concern. What are your specific plans to make healthcare affordable?
I would love to have specifics. Sorry, that's science is what I do. So healthcare. I'm the only candidate up here talking about a single-payer healthcare program. Single-payer healthcare program needs to be a quality program. And by quality, I mean we need to focus on prevention. As an infectious disease scientist, I understand how important and how costly it can be to not have those early stage vaccines, medicines, treatments, rather than the late stage, which are costly and limited. And so I think we need to put our research dollars into our universities and into our companies to make sure that our healthcare system is focused on prevention. And also by quality, I mean making sure that we have enough doctors and nurses in our hospitals. By, I believe, 2025, we are facing a doctor shortage on the order of 100,000 doctors. And so I would also want to make sure we're implementing a robust STEM program, all the way from the preschool level, universal pre-K, all the way through high school and college. Because I believe that if a child wants to become a doctor or a nurse, they should have the opportunity to get that education as soon as possible. And also by quality, I mean that we need to be able to negotiate drug prices. As this leader in the free world, we are the only country paying exorbitant costs for our drug prices. My own father had to retire early because of Parkinson's disease, and so he's on Social Security having to pay for high drug prices and treatments while not having a main income. And so I think I would work with the pharmaceutical companies to make sure we are reducing the drug prices, because as taxpayers, we have already paid once for these drugs, actually. When we pay our taxes, the money goes to NIH and NSF, where the research dollars get spent to develop these drugs the first time around. Thank you.
I believe healthcare is a fundamental human right, and that means that it has to be affordable and accessible. And the ACA made important progress there, but didn't meet the burden of actually providing affordable, accessible healthcare to everybody. Now that's a national issue that Congress needs to address, but it's also a local issue. We were at a winery in Clark County the other night, and the owner said, look, there are two issues that I deal with in my business. One is access to capital, and the other is how to get affordable health insurance for me and my people. I've said that kind of the three threshold questions for me when I go to Congress is going to be how will any proposal impact people, how much will it cost, and what's the process of getting there. I think there are a couple of steps that we need to do very quickly. One is to stand up to Big Pharma and truly negotiate prescription drug prices, but I would also support a Medicare opt-in option as well. Because I have a little bit of time left, I want to clean up some of my last answers. I have also committed not to take any corporate PAC money. I am also a Moms Demand candidate of distinction. I've also committed not to take any Dominion money, and I neglected to say in the last gun violence answer, I think school safety is critically important. I also think we need to acknowledge when we're talking about gun violence that for many communities, those issues don't start and stop at the school door, and for too often, communities of color have been left out of the gun violence conversation. We need to follow Parkland's lead in having a more comprehensive conversation about it.
I had an amazing opportunity to work for a year and a half in the private sector with the largest integrated healthcare provider in this country. And as part of that project, we found $1 billion in savings that we, as the Department of Veterans Affairs, we found $1 billion in savings that we could redirect towards our veterans. And where was that money in? It was in the fact that even in a government agency, the largest provider in the country, they were not negotiating very well the prices not only of drugs, but of medical procedures, and also of medical technology. And they were paying at times 2 or 3 times what the private sector would pay for similar things. And what the private sector pays is far more than what's paid for in other countries. And so we absolutely need people in Congress who understand what the costs are of healthcare, where those costs are coming from, and are willing to negotiate and incentivize the government to do hard-nosed negotiations to change the cost of care in this country. So that's one piece of it. I'm also somebody who, for almost my entire adult life, has gotten government-provided health care as a result of my military service for me and my family. And I believe that's a fundamental right in every American. So I support a Medicare for all option, so that if you don't like or can't get your health care from your employer or from the exchanges, you can opt into Medicare, paying a premium based on your income. I think that offers us the best opportunity to quickly extend universal care and cause competition in the private market so that we can get away from things like I just heard from Robert from Manassas, who told me about how his family had to pay $60,000 because his son, who has autism, came down with a rare disease that wasn't covered by their insurance company. We need to change that in that country. We need to make sure every American has the right to opt into a quality of care that provides for them and their family. And I will fight for that in Congress. Thank you.
For the past 25 years, I've been volunteering in a cancer care for kids. And I actually have seen kids die because they didn't get appropriate treatment early, because they didn't have access to the right kind of health care. I'm telling you, every American has a right to access and to health care. How are we going to do that? Well, I also, as a federal prosecutor, have seen what healthcare fraud has done to our healthcare system. I fought healthcare fraud for a long time. And on my first healthcare fraud trial, the people that I was trying the case against had already stolen $1 billion. So we started a strike force and drove that fraud from $1 billion in billing a year to zero. So what the FBI asked me to do was, can you recreate this strike force across the country so we can start saving healthcare costs today? And what we did was we created these strike forces across the country to drive down healthcare fraud by $10 billion today. We save taxpayers over $10 billion today. I know how to save that money. It is a sin that your tax dollars, 10 to 20 cents of every tax dollar you pay, is being lost to fraud, waste, and abuse. We have to stop that, and I know how to stop that. Number two, we have to drive down drug prices and prescription prices. I've taken on Big Pharma. I led the assault and the signed off on the indictment against Purdue Pharma. I'm not afraid of Big Pharma, and we need to negotiate drug prices to drive down the cost of our drugs. Number three, the third thing I would do is we need to have continuum of care models where we reward healthcare providers that save money. That's the way to drive down healthcare prices in this country. And that's what I would do. Make sure we continue to develop those models to save money. Thank you.
I believe healthcare isn't just a privilege for those who can afford it. I believe it's a right for everybody. And it's a right we shouldn't have to keep fighting for and marching for over and over and over again. The passage of the latest tax bill put at risk healthcare for over 14 million Americans. The proposed cuts I talked about earlier in Trump's budget, the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and food stamps, are all on the premise that ACA will be overturned. So this fight is not over for us. It's just going to look much different moving forward. And to be real honest with you, it's so important that we take back the House. Because while we have Trump as president, we are going to do a lot of blocking and tackling just to keep the health care that we have. And we have to ensure that we fight for what we have, quite honestly. Also, we're Democrats. We're more than just anti-Trump, right? We're the party of ideas and opportunities. And in Congress, we need to start now laying the groundwork for a healthcare system that is affordable and accessible for every single American. And we can start now by trying to negotiate the drug costs. I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs. The VA and DOD both have the ability to negotiate lower drug costs. We need to ensure that our government has that ability as well. Medicare, for instance, doesn't have the option to negotiate. And in Congress, I will fight to make sure that Medicare can be a collective buyer and can negotiate drug costs so that we can reduce drug costs for over 53 million Americans in our country.
I believe that access to affordable, quality health care is a right, not a privilege. But Republicans in Congress have fought tooth and nail against Obamacare and our ability to access it. So when I look at the possibilities of different kinds of plans, I ask myself, does it increase affordability? Does it increase access? One of the things I've been fighting for in Richmond, and one of the things that we can do right here in Virginia, is expand Medicaid to the more than 300,000 people. At the federal level, what we need to ensure is that CMS continues to grant waivers to states who newly expand Medicaid. What I don't want to have happen is for us to be penalized because of stymied efforts by the Republicans in Richmond to stymie Medicaid expansion here in Virginia. So we need to make sure that CMS will still grant the waivers. We also have to fight back against things like block grants. granting state Medicaid funds, because that will directly impact and negatively Virginia because we have been so stingy with our Medicaid here in the state. Republicans, even though they weren't able to outright repeal Obamacare, and despite Barbara Comstock's press releases to the contrary, she is very much in favor of doing it, they have basically done the same thing by repealing the individual mandate. I don't know if you guys saw the news from Friday that insurers are indicating that the Obamacare insurers on the exchange here in Virginia are asking for premium increases of as much as 65% because of the repeal of individual mandates. But there are some things that we can do to help cut costs right now. Obviously, negotiating prescription drug prices is the top thing we can do. That has already been shown in the VA to generate savings, and that's one of the top cost drivers for us. And there are some other things too.
So taking things back to education and schools, overall the 10th Congressional District has very, very strong public schools. That said, what do you believe is your responsibility, not just to the students, but to the nation's public school system?
Well, first, to hold Betsy DeVos accountable, and it's very hard for Congresswoman Comstock to do that when Betsy DeVos is one of her major donors. But look, I have a kid in the Fairfax County public school system. I talk to teachers all of the time, both related to her and related to the broader direction of education in our country. And I talk to parents who say they moved here for the quality of our public schools, and yet our teachers are being paid significantly less than the national average. I've heard multiple teachers say, if I just moved to Arlington County, I could get a $20,000 pay raise and might be able to better afford to raise a family, and so we're losing more experienced teachers, and we need to be able to invest in that. There are also right now, the free and reduced lunch program the federal free and reduced lunch program is not cost of living adjusted. So, and this is hard to go through in less than a minute, but in order to access free and reduced lunch in our school system, a family of four, regardless of where they live, needs to earn less than $45,000 or $35,000 a year. That means that in Prince William County, for example, there's over $300,000 of student lunch debt that the county is absorbing, and then kids are given an alternative meal, which is a granola bar and a juice box. We can do better than that here in this country, and that's something that will particularly impact Virginia's 10th. There are a number of other issues around the school-to-prison pipeline that is more, I think, than a catchphrase, but actually looking at disproportionate suspension rates and access to opportunity and how kids are tested to get into the more advanced placement programs and a number of other issues I'd like to talk about.
This is an issue of deep support to me. I'm a graduate of public high school. My wife is a public school teacher, a union public school teacher. And in fact, because I'm running for Congress right now, which is not really good for private sector work, that's the only income in our household. So I care a heck of a lot about teacher pay. We need to make sure that our public schools remain and become, in some ways, a great equalizer. And I think that the lack of access to a quality public education is probably the largest civil rights issue in this country. Disproportionately, public schools in communities of color are not as good as those in places that aren't communities of color. We need to fight back to make sure that we're fully funding our public schools, both at the national, the state, and the local level. We need to make sure that we're getting past a culture which, over the last generation, has come to start blaming teachers as the cause of all problems in the classroom. I see how early my wife gets up. I see how late she works. She's doing lesson plans for next week at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at life while her husband is off running for Congress. So it is an incredible sacrifice. It is a sacrifice in pay, and it is a dedication to public service. There is a partnership that we need to be encouraging in our communities between our parents, our administrators, and our public school teachers. We need to be developing policies at the federal level that encourage that partnership, that focus not so much on teacher accountability as they do on teacher empowerment and giving them the tools and the education and the learning they need in the classroom. That's what I'm going to fight for in Congress, and I hope that you'll support me doing that. Thank you.
First thing we can do is, our teachers need to be paid more. And the best way to pay our teachers more is to empower the teachers' unions. And the best way to empower teachers' unions is to elect Democrats to Congress. And that's what we need to do first. The second thing we need to do is to allow our students to learn. I was at the March for Your Lives rally, and I had more kids talk about the fact that it was unbelievable to me that more kids would talk about the fact that they are scared in school. That cannot be allowed to be the way our kids learn. And then we have our president who says we need to give the teachers bullets, not books. So I think that one of the best ways that we can empower our kids to learn is actually enact gun safety legislation. So I'm sorry we're back to that, but I think that I can't imagine being afraid to learn in school. And then the third thing I would do is, as Allison talked about, Betsy DeVos is trying to take money from underperforming schools and give it to private schools. And I think that is the exact opposite of what we need to do to fix our schools. We need to build our underperforming schools, help them educate our kids, and not take it away and give it to private schools. And those are the three things I do. Thank you.
I recently just met with a group of teachers here in Loudoun County, and it was incredible to me. Just being reminded by the passion and the dedication that they have. And we were talking about the gun violence issue. And a teacher said to me, she said, look, she said, I'd take a bullet for any one of my kids. I'd die for them. But you can't ask me to kill for them. Right now, we're talking about arming our teachers when our teachers really want to focus on making sure that there is a good environment for our children to learn in. I, in Congress, will fight the cuts to the Department of Education. I will fight the administration to make sure that education is a top priority in this country. I also think we need to invest in STEM programs so that we can close the gender gap in the STEM-related fields. And finally, it is just so important that we pay our teachers well. I said earlier, I was raised by a single mom, and my mom's a teacher. She's still in her 70s, and thank God she's a good teacher, because unfortunately her retirement plan has always been to work harder and to work longer. We have to ensure that we pay our teachers a wage in which they can support their families. Being a teacher is something that is so incredible and such an honorable profession, and we need to pay them accordingly.
This is another question that's very important to me, and public education is very important to me. I'm entirely a product of public education from kindergarten through law school. And I have two kids who are students here at the Loudoun County Public Schools. Right now, we are asking way too much of our teachers. We're not asking them just to be educators. We're asking them to be test prep coaches. We're asking them to be counselors. We're asking them to be protectors. And we're not paying them a fair wage. There are a lot of things that we can do to support them better. And we've been trying to do some of this at the state level. Take away this requirement of all of these unnecessary standardized tests that just teach kids how to memorize. Give teachers an opportunity to teach. And this will also help our kids become better, more productive members of society, better able to be employed, because they'll learn to work collaboratively and work towards making solutions. Another thing that we can do at the federal level is bring back the SALT deduction. Most of education, public education, K through 12, and our state schools are funded by state and local dollars. And by eliminating the SALT deduction or capping it as the tax bill did and Barbara Comstock went along with, it's making it that much harder for our localities to raise the revenue that they need in order to adequately pay our teachers.
So I know it sounds cliche, but I firmly believe that education is the key to our future. And I agree a lot with what has already been said about increasing teacher pay, eliminating the lunch debt, and other things we see in our classrooms as far as too many kids in the classroom, eliminated after-school activities, too many trailers. But I think the number one thing we need to do is increase and level the funding that goes to our schools. As Senator Wexley mentioned, our schools are funded by our property taxes. And so where I live in Prince William County, the western part of the district is a little more wealthy. The schools look great. There's hardly any trailers. When we go to the eastern part of the county, there are less wealthy communities there, and there are tons of trailers. And so I think what I would like to do in Congress is to closely take a look at the budget. In particular, when we look at 2017, there was $1 billion of federal money allocated to education, but there was $9 billion of federal money allocated to the military. And as much of a supporter of the military as I am, I know that there are redundancies and wastefulness happening there. And so I would like to take a closer look at that budget and make sure that we're seeing more federal dollars being given to our schools so that no matter where you live, regardless of your zip code, your child is receiving a quality education. And I also agree with increased STEM programs across the board from pre-K all the way up to the high school levels. And for those students that are not interested in going to college and having a STEM degree, in the high schools we need to make sure we're having those robust and quality technical programs that the kids can take advantage of so that when they come out of high school they can hit the ground running with the jobs that they want to have.
So, seeing as we have about 14 minutes left, I'm actually going to take 2 questions and do my best to mush them into one because I think they're very important. So, there continues to be a belief that mandatory federal sentencing guidelines should be harsher for some substances over others. Do you believe this? And if so, which substances deserve a harsher punishment? And then in addition to that, how do we address the nation's school to prison reform?
You get 3 minutes? Those are great questions. In 2 minutes. But we have an incredible problem in this country that requires criminal justice reform, and I think to tie it together, where we have great inequity in sentencing based not just on the crime committed, but on issues around race. I think there are real things that we can do to alleviate that, both from dealing with the way discipline is meted out in schools, right, that puts kids, when we do it incorrectly and with racial disparities, on the wrong path, and it doesn't facilitate a good school environment that allows them to graduate and take on meaningful work and meaningful education in society. So what we do after folks get out of prison, those who have paid their sentence to society for what they've done, or we don't have effective reintegration programs, or we've preserved relics from Jim Crow like disenfranchisement of those who've been convicted of crime. We need to take that on. I also think there's some just basics we can do. I support the legalization of marijuana. I believe that disproportionate sentencing as a result of marijuana laws in our country are one of the reasons that we have a significant number of folks in prison that ought not to be there. So I think that's one thing we can do, where we have in a country where opiates are widely available and prescribed, and yet a conviction for having marijuana can result in prison time. It's a significant number of people in our prison population. We need to change it. And lastly, I think that we need to make sure that you asked about mandatory sentencing guidelines, that we are giving justices the room they need, judges the room they need, to give sentences that are proportional to the crime that's been committed. And we should get rid of, to the degree we can, mandatory minimum sentences and really go towards criminal justice reform.
Criminal justice reform is very, very important. As a federal criminal prosecutor, I've seen it work, and I've seen it not work. And as it relates to criminal justice reform, I think part of the biggest problem is in state laws that allow people to be arrested for minor crimes, held without bail or until they can make bail. So I think that there is that ends up ultimately sometimes taking the family's breadwinner, putting him in jail, trying to make bail as the family is being destructive all along. So I believe that bail reform is one of the most important parts of it. I think that we are arresting far too many people for minor crimes. And I think if everyone remembers the choke, Eric, I'm trying to think of his last name, in New York, who got the chokehold, Garner. He was arrested for selling single cigarettes, all right? There is no way that even if that was a crime, that should have been an arrestable crime. Why aren't we just issuing these people with summonses? What are we putting them under arrest for? So I think bail reform, arrest reform, I think marijuana, I don't advocate it being legal at all. But I do think the fact that it's a Class D substance being treated the same as heroin is wrong. And I think we have to reevaluate that as well. So I think bail reform is fine, bail reform is important, arrest reform, and then finally I want to talk about the school-to-prison pipeline. It is very clear that minorities in schools are being treated very differently in the way that they're being disciplined. And if you're a minority student, you are being disciplined in a far different way than if you're a white student. And I think that we need to figure out and penalize in a way. Like when I was a kid, I got 5 to 10 chances sometimes. And thank God I did, because I wouldn't be where I am today, and I'm going to stop.
You all got much better with these time with us.
First and foremost, we have to eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing. We also need to invest in community policing to ensure that our police officers are able to fully protect our community, that they reflect our community, that we have that strong partnership between the police force and our community. We also need to ensure that we invest in training of our police workforce to ensure that we can eliminate the inherent biases and work to make sure that we can really have a police force that protects us in a way that is fair. I also want to take this opportunity to briefly touch on the opioid crisis. This is something we haven't really talked about, but in Congress, I want to push the president to make sure he declares a national emergency. What this will do is it will trigger FEMA funding that we can use to put into education, we can use to put into our treatment facilities, we can use to ensure that our drug courts are strong around the district, but it is important that we have the federal attention and the federal funding partnering with our local communities and our state to ensure that we are giving people a fair shot at the treatment and the education that they desperately need and deserve.
This is a great question because in both these situations, communities of color are disproportionately and vastly impacted more than pipeline. This is something that is something I have been working on for years in Richmond. Last year, I carried legislation that gave principals and school administrators alternatives to suspension. In Virginia, we've been referring our kids to law enforcement out of our school system at the highest rate of any state, and this is wrong. And of course, it disproportionately impacts students of color and students with disabilities. So we've also been fighting to give principals and administrators more tools so that they don't have to do that, and also giving them more discretion. But with that discretion comes responsibility. So they need to be trained in inherent bias and realize that they need to treat all children equally and not be having a different set of rules for minority kids. I absolutely oppose mandatory minimums. On the criminal justice side, there are a number of things that we can do. Obviously, mandatory minimums are a terrible thing. We all saw with the crack cocaine guidelines that those were basically racist. We need to make sure that we close down and do not use for-profit prisons. We also need to reform how how we let people out on bond, on bail in this country. Cash bonds give those people who have means an opportunity to get out of jail while their cases are pending. But if people don't have money to put up for the bond, they aren't able to get out, and they have to languish in jail waiting for their cases to be heard, while they are innocent, by the way, before they are proven guilty. So there are a lot of things we can do, and we should do them all at the federal level. Thanks.
All right, criminal justice reform, school prison pipeline. Trying to remember. So overcrowding in prisons is rampant in this country, and I think a large part of it is because we're putting nonviolent drug offenders in prison. Yesterday, I was fortunate to have a conversation with Northern Virginia Normal Group, which is a group in favor of legalizing marijuana. And we had a great discussion about why it's so important to, in my opinion, decriminalize marijuana, take it off the Schedule I so that we're not automatically sending people right to jail. Again, this disproportionately affects people of color, not just in having them go to prison, but the economic loss that they face because they've been in prison for X number of years while their white counterparts are not, and so they're not able to move forward economically. But there are so many reasons to remove marijuana from the Schedule I drug. There's the medicinal reasons. Research is starting to be shown that it works in autism, in epilepsy, PTSD, cancers, pain management. And until it's removed from Schedule I, the researchers here in this country can't do that research. Number 2 is the overcrowded prisons that I just mentioned. And number 3, which I think is important right here, is that hemp from marijuana can be used as for local farmers as a crop. And it's a great plant. It grows quickly, it's good for the soil, and it has so many downstream uses. So I think that and then in terms of the school to prison pipeline, I also agree that we need to be working within our schools to make sure that there are alternatives to kids with the disciplinary reasons, and also making sure that we have the counselors in our schools so that children that have mental health issues, mental health disabilities have the resources that they can use to stay in school and not get sent to prison or to juvenile detention because of their mental health issues rather than disciplinary issues.
I've spent my life working to advance civil rights protections and access to justice and the rule of law. And something I care very deeply about. I was, I think, the only candidate when I declared my candidacy to talk about Black Lives Mattering and the impact of disproportionate actions on Black and brown people. I'm categorically opposed to mandatory minimums. Let's talk about schools. We need to deal with the disproportionate suspension rates. I brought that up earlier. I also support implicit bias training. And as concerned as I am about people getting disproportionately suspended, I'm also concerned about people not getting, people getting wrongly not tapped for honors classes and advancement opportunities and not identified there. On prisons, briefly, I'm a strong supporter of criminal justice reform. I am a strong supporter of community policing. We absolutely need bail reform. And we need to deal with addiction as the disease that it is rather than...
Okay, thank you all so much. I pride myself on punctuality, and it looks like we are getting ready to 5 o'clock. Called Rise to Run. We're raising up to run for office one day. I think that's what's going to get Mari and to be part of forums like this. If you need any help, my business card is out front. I learned that I needed one of them. Again, everyone, please make sure you can vote. If not, there's